Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder if computers can actually think and understand the world like we do? Well, this new paper dives deep into that super fascinating question. Imagine a super smart AI that can write stories, answer questions, and even code. That is basically what these language models or LMS are. They're trained on massive amounts of text, and they do a surprisingly good job of sounding like they understand things. But do they really grasp concepts like dog or justice? The way humans do. That is where this research comes in. It is looking at how much we can learn about our own minds by studying these AI models. This paper is all about semantic cognition. Think of it as the brain's filing system for concepts. It is how we create mental ideas about things, organize them, and use them to make sense of the world and interact with it. For a long time, scientists have studied this in humans. Now, with these powerful language models, they have a new kind of mind to investigate. It's like having a digital brain that we can poke and prod to see how it works. The big idea here is a two-way street. On one hand, we can use what we know about how humans learn and understand to test these AI models. Are they building concepts in a way that makes sense to us? On the other hand, studying these AI models might actually teach us something new about how our own brains work, especially how much understanding can come just from reading and hearing language. So, to do any of this, researchers need good ways to measure what these language models actually know. This paper breaks down the different tools scientists are using to do just that. They group these methods into two main categories. One that looks at the structure and content of concepts the AI has learned, and another that examines how the AI uses that knowledge, its function and deployment. Let's start with the first group, testing the actual knowledge inside the AI. Think of it like opening up a textbook the AI has read and seeing what facts it has marked down. One early method was like a quiz. They'd take the AI's internal representation of a word like crow, and then they'd train a separate little computer program called a classifier to guess if a certain property like can fly was true for a crow. If the classifier could accurately link the word representation to the property, it meant the AI had some idea about that property. But this got complicated because for every single property they had to build a new quiz. Then came more advanced AIs like BERT. Instead of building separate quizzes for properties, they realized they could just ask the AI itself. They'd give it a sentence like crows are and see what the AI predicted to fill in the blank. If it often suggested birds or black, that told them something about its understanding of crows. A really clever refinement of this is called minimal pair testing. Here is how it works. Imagine you give the AI two sentences that are almost identical, like a crow can fly and a penguin can fly. The AI then has to decide which statement is more likely to be true. If it correctly prefers a crow can fly, it shows it understands that crows typically fly but penguins don't. This method is great because it compares two very similar ideas, making it easier to pinpoint what the AI is learning. There is also a whole area of research that looks at the geometry of the AI's internal understanding. When these AIs process words, they represent them as lists of numbers called vectors. The idea is that words with similar meanings will have similar number lists, and these lists will be arranged in a kind of conceptual space. You might have heard of this before, like the famous example where if you take the vector for king, subtract the vector for man, and add the vector for woman, you get something very close to the vector for queen. This shows that the AI has learned some basic relationships between words. Researchers use these number lists to see if the AI has learned about properties like size or color, by looking at how words are positioned relative to each other in this abstract space. But knowing what information is stored is only half the story. The other half is how the AI uses that information. This is where functional tests come in. This is about looking at the AI's behavior. A really important type of function is inductive generalization. This is our ability to learn from a few examples and then make educated guesses about new situations. For instance, if you learn that robins and ostriches both have a special hormone called T9, you might then infer that other birds probably have it too. We don't just memorize facts, we make predictions. Scientists are now testing if language models can do this too. They give the AI a new piece of information like robins have the T9 hormone and then ask it to predict if other related things would also have it. The results are a bit mixed. Sometimes the AI's predictions match human behavior, and sometimes they don't. It seems that even if the AI has the right information stored, It might not always use it in the way humans do when making these kinds of predictions. Another functional test is property inheritance. This is similar to inductive generalization, but specifically about categories. If you know that all mammals have fur, and you learn that the new animal is a mammal, you can reasonably assume it has fur. Researchers test if AIs can correctly pass down properties from a general category to more specific examples. For instance, if they know that birds can fly, does the AI correctly infer that a wug, a made-up bird word, can fly? If it is told the wug is a type of robin. A more recent technique is knowledge editing. This is like playing a prank on the AI. Researchers might trick the AI into believing something false, like cobras bark, and then see if it makes the logical consequences of that false belief, like thinking that cobras also chase squirrels. This helps them understand how the AI's knowledge is connected and how it reasons, even when given incorrect information. It's a way to see if changing one piece of knowledge ripples through the AI's understanding as it does in our own minds. So, we've seen how researchers are testing what language models know and how they use it by borrowing methods from human psychology. Now, the paper looks at how this research can push our understanding of human semantic cognition forward. One of the most exciting possibilities is learning just how much we can understand about the world from language alone. These language models are trained only on text, and yet they show these sophisticated behaviors. This suggests that a lot of what we consider knowledge might actually be encoded in the language we use. By carefully studying which types of information the AI learns from text and which it struggles with, we can get clues about how humans build their own conceptual understanding, even from limited or indirect language input. A cool way to investigate this is with something called controlled rearing. This is like giving the AI a very specific diet of language. Researchers can remove certain types of sentences or grammatical structures from the AI's training data and then see how that missing food affects its understanding. If, for example, removing sentences that explicitly state category memberships makes the AI worse at inferring categories. It tells us how important those explicit statements are for human learning too. The idea is then to test these findings in real-world experiments with children, seeing if similar language patterns help them learn. Another big question is how language-based learning interacts with learning from our senses, what we see, hear, and touch. This is where multimodal models come in, which are trained on both text and images. For example, by comparing AIs trained only on text to those trained on text and images. Researchers can see what benefits come from visual or other sensory input. Do these models get better at talking about concrete things? Do they align more closely with how our brains represent things when they see images? These studies help map out what kind of knowledge is primarily built from language and what needs that extra real-world grounding. Finally, there's the cutting edge of neural network interpretability. This is about trying to understand the inner workings of these AI models to see exactly how they arrive at their answers. It is like having a brain scanner for the AI by pinpointing specific parts of the AI's network that are responsible for certain behaviors, like property inheritance. Researchers can see if these internal mechanisms have parallels in human cognition. This could reveal shared computational principles for how different types of knowledge are processed and interconnected in both artificial and biological minds. So, what is the big takeaway from all this? The research shows that language models have become surprisingly sophisticated in how they handle concepts even if they aren't perfect. This gives us a unique chance to re-examine how language itself shapes our understanding of the world. By developing better ways to test these models and by carefully studying the insights they offer, we can make real progress in understanding how we learn, how we organize knowledge, and how we use it every day. It's a journey into the nature of meaning itself, both for machines and for us. The study here has some really strong points. It uses a variety of clever methods inspired by decades of research on human thinking, and it frames the problem in a really clear, understandable way. It is great that they're looking at both the stored knowledge and how that knowledge is used, which reflects a more complete picture of cognition. However, it's also important to remember the limitations. These are still AIs, and they operate very differently from human brains. While they can mimic certain behaviors, it's hard to say if they truly understand in the same way we do. And a lot of these tests are still being developed, so we need to be cautious about drawing firm conclusions. For instance, the knowledge editing experiments, while cool, can be tricky because the AI's response might depend more on the specific editing method than on its underlying conceptual knowledge. Looking ahead, this research opens up so many doors. I am excited to see how controlled rearing experiments with language models can directly inform hypotheses we can test with humans. And the work with multimodal models really hints at how we might map out the distinct contributions of language versus sensory experience to our conceptual world. The interpretability side, if it can provide human-relevant explanations, could be revolutionary for understanding the very mechanisms of thought. What all of this suggests is that the line between human cognition and artificial intelligence is becoming more blurred, and studying one can profoundly illuminate the other. It makes you wonder what other aspects of our minds we can unlock by building and studying smarter and smarter machines. That's all for this week on RUBIN'S Mind Lab. If you found this dive into language models and human cognition as fascinating as I did, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss our next exploration. And let me know in the comments what else you'd like us to cover. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.